Thank you, Nat. Well, the province announcing $4 billion in funding for municipalities yesterday to offset costs from COVID-19. And Toronto wants a big chunk of that. And the province also expected to announce tomorrow that Toronto could be moving into Phase 3 sometime soon. So for more, joining us to discuss these issues and more, as we always do, check in with him weekly, Mayor John Tory. Good morning to you, Mayor.
Hi, Mel.
So let's start with the numbers first. And I'm talking about the case count numbers that look promising. We heard from Dr. Eileen de Villa earlier on here on BT with just the 5 cases here. She sounds very optimistic. Hopefully that green light is a go for us as of tomorrow. What are you expecting to hear? I know you had a meeting with the GTHA mayors yesterday.
Well, I think, we spent quite a bit of time. It's interesting to be in those meetings because you have quite a few of those municipalities from outside of Toronto and Peel that are in Phase 3 and have been for a few days. And I guess if I heard anything, it would be that, there's a real concern about things like the crazy Brampton party. I mean, here you have people that are not just having a party, but they have like valet parking. It's clearly sort of a premeditated thing that goes directly against all the advice that has been offered in terms of not having big gatherings and not having a lot of people sort of in crowd scenes. So I think that's the concern. And I think it's a concern that remains with the province about Toronto and Peel moving into Stage 3. And Stage 3 doesn't matter about the ignorance of people having those kinds of parties or not, but it's just, is there an attitude out there that sort of says on the beaches, in the indoor restaurants, which would be open for dining, in the backyards, that we're going to have a lot of these kinds of things going on, which would lead to a new spread. But I think the numbers are good enough. I think the discipline most people have shown with face coverings and so on is good enough that we can move forward. I hope we do. But again, that's a provincial decision that will be announced, soon, and I hope it's positive.
Some of the visuals we were seeing from the beach, Cherry Beach specifically, Hanlan's Point, a lot of these videos going viral. And a lot of people, as you heard from You Sound Off in our portion this morning, saying, we need to do more. We need to enforce more. I know that it's a personnel issue as well. Do we even have the bodies to do that? And can fines be increased?
It's not even so much that. We have lots of people. We can sort of concentrate them onto the 2 or 3 beaches where there's been a problem. I think that what you end up with is a couple of things. First, you have to have some degree of cooperation from people who just decide they're not going to go where the crowd scenes are, even though that's what human beings love to do, especially on a hot day, on the beach by the lake in the summer. Secondly, I think that you have to ask yourself about that balance that we have to achieve. And I think right now, and I don't tell the enforcement people what to do, they decide on their own how to exercise their discretion. But you have to ask yourself, well, would we be having a story here on BT, 5 days after people handed out all kinds of tickets to people on the beach saying that we were running some sort of a police state? So I think right now people opt in favor of public health, and they would prefer a slightly more rigorous enforcement as opposed to the approach that the enforcement people have tried to take, which is one of education. They've had thousands of encounters with people, thousands, where they say, hey, like the law says you are not supposed to be here in this crowded circumstance. Can you please pack up and move down the beach or go somewhere else? So it's one of those things that's very, very perplexing for us, because really what we hope is that people will just understand that they should avoid crowd scenes on beaches, certainly not, actually make them happen in backyards and places like that, because that in places like, out west and in Ottawa and so on, Montreal, those crowd scenes in both bars, which is why we've recommended some additional measures there, and in backyards have been the place where the virus is spreading among a much younger group of people. I think yesterday they said more than 50% of the cases were people who were under the age of 40.
Yeah, and we've been seeing that trend over the last week or so, people under the age of 40, over 50% for sure. I want to get to this. There are a lot of questions. We've seen some of your press conferences being disrupted by people who are tenant rights, looking at not allowing evictions. This is obviously a provincial matter. There's only so much the city can do. Your life personally disrupted, and we're hearing of yet another protest outside of your residence. What can you say to this? I know it's going to be talked about in City Council virtually today, but what can you say to those who are complaining right now?
Well, first of all, I've indicated some dissatisfaction with the piece of legislation that was passed by the provincial legislature, and they sort of say, well, I should take steps to try and get it repealed. Well, there's nothing I can do to get legislation repealed at Queen's Park. In fact, there's a number of bills up there I would repeal if I had the power. But, this is a serious matter, and I've said no tenant should be evicted without a hearing, and that legislation actually makes it possible a tenant could be evicted without a hearing, for example. But look, on the matter of the protests, I don't dispute the right of people to have protests. It's a welcome part of the wonderful country in which we live. But the notion of protesting at the house of an elected representative, I think, is not a good thing to make a habit of. And this is the second time in a couple of weeks. But more importantly to me, much more importantly, I live in a condominium building, as many people do live in condos or apartments. Think about my neighbors. I'm not even at the building today when they're protesting. I'm at City Hall, where I am right now, being a participant in a city council meeting, and they're going to go and disrupt my neighbors. The last time they tried to storm inside the building. And imagine if you lived in that building and you weren't me. They're thinking, what did I do to deserve this? The fact that I happen to live in the same building as the mayor does, it's just not right and it's not fair. But they're welcome to come to City Hall, or probably more appropriately go to Queen's Park, because it's provincial legislation they have an issue with. And I have some issues with it too. So anyway, you take these things as it comes and as they come, and you just sort of deal with them as best you can.
Yeah, indeed. Coming up a little bit later on in the show, we have Toronto Police Chief Mark Saunders retiring in just a few days' time. I'm sure you've had a number of discussions since he announced his retirement over the last month and a half. Are there any messages you'd like to pass along for him as we say goodbye to him?
37 years. That's the main message that I would convey. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there watching BT who don't end up putting in 37 years in their career, whatever it might be. Mark Saunders has put in 37 years in public service. And by all accounts, because I wasn't around for all of it, by all accounts, he has done an excellent job. He's had just about every leadership position you could have in the Toronto Police Service. And for all the issues that surround the Toronto Police these days and the need for change, which he recognizes, you know, he has done a good job for people. He's been an honest, straightforward person, and I just thank him for his public service, because I think it came at a very important time, as it always does with a police chief, and I think he can be very proud of his overall record after all those years of service to us and to keeping our city safe.
Indeed. Well said. Mayor Tory, as always, thank you for joining us this week.
Okay, Mel, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Time now is 7:14.